The call came on a Tuesday morning, the kind of gray, unremarkable Tuesday that has no business changing your life. I was in the break room at work, stirring coffee I hadn't wanted, when my phone buzzed on the counter. The number was local but unfamiliar. I almost let it go to voicemail. I don't know why I picked up. Is this Waverly's mother? My heart stopped. Just stopped. 3 words and I couldn't breathe. Yes, I managed. Yes, this is her mother. This is Dr. Osi at Meridian Children's Hospital. Your daughter was brought in this morning. I need you to come in as soon as possible. I didn't ask how they got my number. I didn't ask why my ex-husband hadn't called me himself. I grabbed my bag and I ran. My ex-husband's name is Declan. We were together for 6 years, married for 3 of them, and for most of that time, I genuinely believed he was a good man. Quiet, controlled. The kind of man who always said the right thing in front of other people and had a different set of rules for when it was just the 2 of us. We had 1 daughter together, Waverly, who was 7 when everything fell apart, and 9 now. She has my eyes and his stubbornness and a laugh that sounds like a question. When she was small, she used to climb into my lap and press her forehead against mine and say, "Mama, I can feel what you're thinking." I believed her. The divorce was ugly in the way that quiet men make things ugly. There was no screaming, no dramatic accusations in the courtroom. Declan sat across from me with that same calm expression he always wore and systematically dismantled every piece of evidence that I was a fit mother. He had emails, ones I couldn't remember writing, ones that sounded like me but weren't quite right. He had a therapist who testified that I had exhibited erratic and emotionally unstable behavior during a session I had attended precisely once. After the miscarriage I had the year before the separation, he had a neighbor who said she'd seen me leaving Waverly alone in the car. I hadn't. I knew I hadn't. But I couldn't prove it. And the judge, an older man with tired eyes who had probably seen 100 versions of this story, awarded Declan primary custody with supervised visitation for me. Supervised, as in someone sat in the room while I read my daughter bedtime stories. The visit stopped after 4 months. Declan's attorney sent a letter claiming Waverly was showing signs of distress after our sessions. My attorney told me fighting, it would cost me another $12,000 I didn't have. I was sleeping on my sister's couch at the time. I paid. For 2 years, I knew my daughter only through school photographs that arrived in my email because I was still technically on the enrollment contact list. Declan didn't know about that. I would stare at those photos, her gap-toothed smile, the way she held her shoulders a little tense, even when she was grinning, and try to figure out if she was okay, if she was eating, if she still remembered how I smelled. 8-year-olds don't forget their mothers. That's what I told myself every night. The hospital parking lot was half empty. I ran anyway. The woman at the information desk was kind in that practiced way hospital staff learned to be, warm without being warm, and she told me Dr. Osi was expecting me on the 4th floor, pediatric oncology. I think I already knew. In the elevator. The word oncology has a weight to it. It sits on your chest differently than other words. Dr. Osi was younger than I expected. She had her hair pulled back and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and the expression of someone who had learned to deliver bad news without flinching from it. She shook my hand and then she said, "Waverly has been diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia." I sat down in a chair I didn't remember moving toward. She kept talking. Treatment plans, chemotherapy, something called a bone marrow transplant, in the event that first-line treatment didn't produce remission. Donor matching. She was very thorough. I nodded at intervals and understood approximately 40% of what she said. What I understood completely was this. Waverly was sick. Waverly needed help. And for reasons Dr. Osi didn't explain in that first conversation, they had called me instead of my ex-husband. "Where is Declan?" I finally asked. "Her father, where is he?" Dr. Osie's expression shifted just slightly. "He was contacted yesterday when Waverly was first admitted," she said. "We haven't been able to reach him since." I saw Waverly that afternoon. She was smaller than I remembered, or maybe it was the hospital bed making her look that way, swallowed up by white sheets with an IV taped to the back of her hand. She had her hair in 2 braids, a little messy, the kind of braids someone does when they're not sure how to do braids. When I walked in, she looked at me for a long second like she was checking whether I was real. Then she said, "Mom," and her voice cracked in the middle of it, and I crossed the room and held her, and for a minute neither of us said anything else. She had lost weight. I could feel her shoulder blades under my hands like small wings. She was pale in a way that had nothing to do with lighting. "How long have you been feeling sick?" I asked, when I could talk again. She shrugged against my shoulder. "A while. I told Dad I was tired all the time and he said I was being dramatic." She said it matter-of-factly, the way kids do when something has become so normal it's stopped registering as wrong. That word, dramatic, landed somewhere in my chest and stuck there. Later that afternoon, the hospital social worker came to speak with me. Her name was Ms. Fairchild, and she had the kind of careful, neutral face people practice in graduate school. She told me that Waverly had been brought in by a teacher, not her father, who had noticed her collapsing in the hallway at school, that Declan had been called and had arrived at the hospital that evening, and then left and had not returned. That was 36 hours ago. "Has he been a consistent presence in her care?" Miss Fairchild asked. I thought about how to answer that. "I haven't had access to my daughter for 2 years," I said finally. "So I can't tell you what her day-to-day life has looked like. What I can tell you is that she's lost a significant amount of weight and she's been symptomatic long enough that the school noticed before her father did." Miss Fairchild wrote something down. She thanked me. She left. I went back to Waverly's room and sat in the chair beside her bed and watched her sleep, and I made a decision. I wasn't leaving this hospital. They needed a bone marrow donor. Dr. Osie explained it to me on the 3rd day, when the initial blood work came back and the treatment picture clarified. Waverly's case was aggressive enough that they wanted to get ahead of it. A matched donor, ideally a biological sibling or parent, would give her the best odds. I volunteered immediately. They drew my blood that same afternoon. Declan finally reappeared on the 4th day. He walked into the hospital with the same settled, unruffled look he always had, like a man who had simply been held up in traffic and not, say, missing for 4 days while his child lay in a hospital bed. He had a bouquet of flowers that were slightly too cheerful for a pediatric oncology ward. He was surprised to see me. I could tell because a muscle in his jaw twitched just once before he smoothed it out. "Nora," he said. My name in his mouth always sounded like a polite correction. "Declan." He looked past me toward Waverly's room. "You can't be here. You don't have custody." "My daughter is in the hospital," I said. "Try to remove me." He didn't try. He went to speak with the nursing staff, and I could see him from the hallway talking in low, reasonable tones, and I knew exactly what he was doing because I had watched him do it to me for 3 years. Declan was very good at sounding reasonable. It was his primary skill. But here's the thing about hospitals. They have their own hierarchies. And a mother who has been sitting at her child's bedside for 4 days, who has already submitted to bone marrow testing, who the social worker has already spoken with. She carries a different kind of weight than a father who disappeared for days, and fathers showed up with gas stations, flowers. He didn't get me removed. The donor test results came back on a Thursday. Dr. Osie called me into her office, which I had learned by then was not a good sign. Good news came at the bedside. Complicated news came in the office with the door closed. She sat across from me and she folded her hands on the desks, and she said, "I need to discuss something with you before we proceed, and I want to ask you to remain calm." "Okay," I said. Your bone marrow compatibility results were preliminary flagged for an irregularity, she said, so we ran a secondary panel, a more comprehensive one. She paused. Nora, the results indicate that Waverly is not biologically related to you. I heard the words. I understood each one individually. Together they formed a sentence that made no sense. That's not possible, I said. I gave birth to her. I was there. I know, she said, which is why we ran the panel 3 times before I called you in here. I want to be very clear. I'm not questioning your experience. What I'm telling you is that the genetic markers don't align. It raises the question of whether the child in this room is the same child you gave birth to. The room tilted. There was a long silence in which I was aware of things very far away. A PA system, a cart rolling past in the hallway, the sound of Dr. Osi breathing steadily across the desk from me. What are you saying? I asked. I'm saying, she said very carefully, that we believe there may have been a switch, either at birth or at some point after. They brought in a patient advocate, then a hospital administrator, then eventually a detective. His name was Detective Branagh, older, heavy-set, with the kind of face that looked like it had heard everything and was prepared to hear more. He sat across from me in a conference room while Dr. Osi and the administrator stood near the window, and he asked me to walk him through Waverly's birth and the first months of her life. I told him everything I could remember. The hospital, the nurses, coming home, the first weeks of sleep deprivation and fierce animal love. Declan's mother staying with us, which I hadn't wanted, but had agreed to because I was exhausted, and she offered. The way Declan sometimes took Waverly for long drives at night when she wouldn't sleep, because he said the motion calmed her. Detective Branagh wrote things down. He thanked me. He asked me to stay available. That evening, Declan arrived at the hospital for what I had learned was his second visit in a week. He walked into Waverly's room and I watched him from the doorway. Watched him look at her in that same detached way. He looked at most things, the way a man looks at a problem he's calculating the cost of. He didn't know yet. I could tell from the way he moved. The detective came the next morning. I was with Waverly when I heard it. Voices in the hallway, the particular cadence of official conversation turning sharp. Waverly was dozing, her hand light in mine. I went to the door. Declan was in the hallway with Detective Branagh and another officer, and for the first time in all the years I had known him, Declan's face was not composed this. What came out over not my following weeks was daughter. Waverly was not my biological daughter. My biological daughter, whose name I was only now learning, whose existence I had not known, had been raised by another family in a suburb 40 minutes away. The swap had not been accidental. It had happened when Waverly was 11 days old. Both babies had been brought to the same pediatrician's office for newborn checkups. Declan had been alone with them, briefly, in a waiting room. I want to be precise here, because the temptation is to reach for a dramatic explanation, a motive that makes the scale of it make sense. What came out in the investigation was simpler and colder than anything I could have imagined. Declan had known, early in my pregnancy, that he carried a genetic condition, one that he had not told me about, one that, if passed to a child, would require lifelong medical management and significant financial cost. When our daughter was born, she was tested. She had inherited the marker. The other baby had not. So he switched them. He switched them and he said nothing, and he raised the healthy baby as ours, and somewhere across town another family raised my daughter without knowing either. And then, because the healthy baby he had chosen got sick anyway, because leukemia does not check anyone's plans, the lie unraveled in a hospital room when my bone marrow results came back wrong. There is a woman named Cecily who lives 40 minutes away from me. She is 33 years old, and she works in landscape architecture, and she has a daughter named Juniper who is 9 years old and has my eyes and my mother's stubborn chin and a laugh that sounds like a question. We met in the hospital. The hospital had contacted her family as well once the investigation opened. She sat across from me in a waiting room and we looked at each other and we both cried. Because what else do you do? Her daughter had been her daughter for 9 years. My daughter had been my daughter for 9 years. The biology didn't undo any of that. It just added a layer of something enormous and unnameable on top of it. What we decided, eventually and carefully and with a great deal of help from people who specialize in exactly this kind of situation, was that both girls would know the full truth and that all of us, Cecily, her husband, me, would find a way to let them have each other. They are half strangers and half sisters, and they are figuring it out the way 9-year-olds figure things out, which is better than how adults usually manage it. Declan was arrested 14 months ago. The charges are numerous. Fraud, among other things. He had, it emerged, been quietly building a case for government disability assistance based on Waverly's anticipated medical needs stemming from the genetic condition she was supposed to have inherited. The condition she didn't actually have because she wasn't his biological daughter to begin with. He had created paperwork. He had filed claims. He had been collecting payments. He had also, the investigators found, modified the custody documentation in at least 2 places. Small alterations that had shifted the language just enough to cut off my visitation rights more completely than the original order had specified. My attorney is handling that. The original judge, who had the tired eyes and who I had spent 2 years resenting, turned out to be genuinely appalled and immediately moved to vacate the custody arrangement pending review. I'm not going to tell you the legal process has been clean or fast or satisfying. It has been slow and expensive and full of days where I sat in my car in parking left and cried until I had nothing left. There is no version of this story where everything is okay now. Too much time passed, too much was taken. But here is what I will tell you. I was at Waverly's last oncology appointment 2 weeks ago. She is in remission. They found her a matched donor through the National Registry. A stranger, someone she will probably never meet, who said yes to a phone call and showed up and saved her life. Waverly knows about all of it now, as much as a 9-year-old can know. She processes it the way she processes most things, in sideways fragments, asking questions out of nowhere, and then going back to whatever she was doing. Last week she climbed into my lap, too big for it really, all elbows, and pressed her forehead against mine, the way she used to when she was small. "Mama," she said, "I can still feel what you're thinking." I held her tighter and I didn't say anything, because what she was thinking and what I was thinking were probably the same thing. We made it, we're still here, and no one is going to take that from us again.